Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. My name is Krisha Lenzo. I'm the Executive Director of Harvard in Tech, and we have a great webinar for you today. As you've been seeing with my numerous emails and in our newsletter, we have a topic that I think is really interesting to our community more broadly, and I'll get into that in a second. So here's a bit of the background. Since the mysterious Satoshi Nakamoto authored the Bitcoin white paper over a decade ago, blockchain has been confined to theory and abstract models. The technology could theoretically be used to change industries for the better, facilitating direct peer-to-peer transactions without an intermediary. But unfortunately, it's faced with scalability issues. In the past 2 years, however, we have seen companies integrate blockchain into their existing products, from healthcare startups using the technology to securely store sensitive patient data, to financial giants like PayPal offering cryptocurrencies for users. The technology is rapidly being scaled and deployed, with use cases serving as the bridge between papers and adoption. So today, we are joined by Beyond Protocol CEO Jonathan Manzi. Beyond Protocol specializes in IoT devices and aims to create a universal language of machines. The company plans to make all IoT devices compatible with one another, no matter their memory or bandwidth. Imagine having a smoke detector signal to a nearby drone that there's a fire, and the drone flies over to extinguish the flames with water. So that's a really cool use case scenario here. We've specifically asked Jonathan to join us today because the company has rolled out a number of high-profile use cases, including one with the European Union Commission and another one with celebrity athletes like NFL tight end Ron Gronkowski, which I'm sure a lot of you know. Jonathan's background is an interesting one. He became the world's youngest millionaire at 15 after launching the internet advertising company Vintage, which finds new ad partners for media giants like Netflix. After dropping out of Stanford, we won't hold it against him here at Harvard in Tech, he founded the startup Inc., which repositioned printing services for young entrepreneurs and those needing to give abstract ideas a physical representation in the world. So with that bio, we have more to say about Jonathan, but we're really excited to have him here with us today, and I'll turn it over to Jonathan.
Well, thank you very much. It's an honor and pleasure to be here and be able to have a discussion about blockchain technology and everything kind of going on in that area. I know right now it seems like every time I open up my web browser or I'm getting a notification on my phone, it has to do with some element of crypto, whether it's markets or government regulatory matters. So it's truly a really interesting time and a relevant time for this emerging technology. One of the intents for the discussion is to drive into product development, and specifically, as you're developing something that touches this really interdisciplinary evolving industry, something that is, one part tech and it could be really deep tech, but another part governance and regulatory matters, and another part privacy concerns. It's a really interesting approach that one must take, or a young team must take to trying to bring something from a theory and idea to execution. So I'll try to, as we go through this discussion, point out some of those decision points that we made along that journey. It's a different type of product development. I think a new kind of emerging way to approach product development when you're building in this industry, in this new emerging ecosystem. A little bit of additional background on Beyond Protocol, which we'll be analyzing throughout the discussion. So this will be by way of my background as well. As it relates to the post-high school career, and by the way, I was in high school about 45 minutes north of the campus. I was up in Danvers, Massachusetts at St. John's Prep on the North Shore. And in terms of the post-high school years, as you alluded to, I went to the West Coast. I tried to get as far away as possible from the East Coast, just purely because that seemed to make sense at the time. But The kind of being educated in Silicon Valley, I did not graduate. I dropped out. One of the things that was emerging at the time, which is kind of familiar to what we might be seeing with blockchain technology, is the whole Web 2 movement, and now we might call that Web 3. At the time, I did something a little bit different. It was related to the convergence of software and hardware. And specifically, we made a robotic kiosk that basically did everything that a FedEx office could do in a form factor that looks like maybe an ATM, and you could capture about 80% of the top line at a Kinko's in this unit. And in coming up with solutions around hardware and software for that company, we were fortunate to kind of be identified as these really outside the box thinkers for the printing space. And the now CEO of HP, Enrique Lores, who's the president at the time, approached us with a product development matter, a problem, a real big problem that he was facing with his enterprise printers in offices. And what was going on is that there was a lot of breach. If you look at the Gartners of the world, they'll point to the enterprise printer and say, this is the IoT device. They categorize it as an IoT device. And by the way, the one that is the most hackable and causing the most damage in enterprise in terms of the data that comes from it and where people go once they get inside through that entry point. So he said, could you guys look at making a technology for the enterprise printer that would help us with cybersecurity? And we went into blockchain technology, and we figured out that if we took, and I'll get into the tech a little bit in more detail momentarily, but the hypothesis that we had is if we took two pieces of esoteric technology, the hardware signature, and specifically underneath that, something called the physical unclonable function, and we merged that with blockchain technology in terms of validating nodes. And again, I'll get into it a little bit deeper in a second with something that is more concrete. We figured we could make his enterprise printers less hackable, and then we could do some pretty cool things after we got the technology in that looked like smart contracts. So could this printer programmatically order consumables, paper and ink, when those sort of things came up above and beyond the cybersecurity fix? And we kind of came to this conclusion when we developed this solution that, wow, this technology is actually remarkably useful. And we learned about as kind of these product development guys and girls that were just kind of getting our hands around this emerging IoT market, which is really exploding. We learned that there were these entrenched issues that the industry veterans had recognized. Some of them were fortunate, advised our startup and invested in our startup. And one of those was not only the IoT security problem that we solved with respect to the printer, but IoT devices right now can't talk to each other from silo to silo. So if you have, let's say, a bunch of devices developed by Google, there's no way for someone to come on the outside and knit them together with devices developed by Samsung. You would have to kind of in business consortia come up with an agreement. Samsung and Google are going to work together, and they're going to allow these developers to share resources, get access to some of the internal methodologies to build something. And that's terribly inefficient if you think about what could be built if you had the ability for people to develop apps on multiple device silos. I mean, there's things that could come up that really could be super impactful. And we have the technology now, we just don't have a standard. We have the technology now, but we just don't have the security. And so when we recognize these things, particularly with these industry veterans that we were fortunate to advise us, one of them, we're really grateful for his support, Stephen DeFranco. He was the senior vice president at Broadcom, and helped merge the IoT division of Qualcomm into Broadcom, and was their GM of IoT as he was their SVP. And him and others were saying, hey, you've got this really interesting theory. It's very academic. It almost reminds us of TCP/IP as it came out of ARPA decades before. And the cool thing about this is TCP/IP, the heart of the internet, did a terrific job allowing for computers and nodes to communicate with each other, but it overlooked the identity layer. It overlooked the fact that in order to start communicating, they should say who they are, and this kind of would solve the security issue and the cross silo issue to an extent. Again, we'll get to some of that in a moment. But we had our first theory issue, which is the overarching point of this discussion. How do we get this theory that sounds as bold as the new era TCP/IP to help solve an issue as pressing and as relevant as Samsung devices talking to Google devices, and how as a team of 3 or 4 people, who by the way have other commitments with other startups that we're running, how do we actually bring that out? So the backdrop is this was 2018. This is early 2018 when we had this light bulb moment. Let's start a blockchain technology startup, and this was the premise: inter-device communication and kind of smart contracts on IoT devices as opposed to smart contracts just on nodes. And we'll get into the technology a little bit. I'll drive there, and then we could drive out into some of the use cases. So from in how we bridged, I think, that delta from theory to execution. So on the technology front, how this works is this is pretty interesting if you think about it. Right now, if I'm in conversation with my colleague on WhatsApp, and I send my colleague a message, he or she would open it up and see that it's coming from me, see it came from me, and the cool thing is other parties can't peer in to see that message because of encryption, and that is a really helpful standard and thing that we rely on. The fact that others can't peer in and see the messages that we send each other when we opt to use secure encrypted platforms. But there's a huge issue right now, and that's that if I send the message to that party and although it's encrypted, it's actually not me, it's another party sending the message, but pretending to be me. It could be encrypted, but there's a spoof. There's another party purporting to be me sending a message. And so what happens there is the colleague would open the message and kind of do what the pretend me says. And this is the quintessential issue right now in cybersecurity. And this is hacking. This is unauthorized access. And to solve it, what Beyond Protocol proposes, and this is that groundbreaking kind of light bulb moment that we had, was let's have me, as I send the message to the colleague, sign it with a chip in my phone. And they call that the hardware signature, and it's no different than me kind of signing a letter and sending it to someone. From a technical standpoint, it's something that's called the physical unclonable function. Actually goes down into the substrate and extracts a unique ID from the silicon lattice. All silicon is inherently random and forms a kind of a fingerprint or an iris. And so we grab that and sign the message, outbound message, with that ID. And then we go a step further, and this is where the blockchain comes in. We put validated nodes around the message, around the node that's sending the message. And they say, hey, we've seen that hardware signature before. It's legitimate. And as you add more and more validated nodes who are doing this work, it becomes more and more probabilistically impossible for there to be a hack, spoofing. And this framework, this architecture, is when we kind of have this light bulb moment, identity layer, providing the identity first, then that leads to authentication between devices. this is basically the knitting of that. What happens next is you have the ability for the devices, once they identify themselves and authenticate into larger programs, to then be able to transfer value. And the transfer of value provides kind of this prong that's now economic, and it's not necessarily just technology, and this kind of opens up the interdisciplinary breadth of blockchain, and there's some considerations there. What does transfer of value mean? Does that mean you open up a new app store opportunity, so all these devices, a developer can come and build like the next industry-shaking thing like Uber on top of any combination of devices? And how does that developer, bring together a scalable economic model for those efforts, and obviously provide a basis for participation for the users in that economic model? So that's kind of from the technical standpoint, what Beyond Protocol is, and going from and getting into theory with that, and in the journey that we went from kind of identification of, hey, there's a need out there, and then theorizing, hypothesizing how we could solve it. And now this next phase of this discussion is, how do we go about championing this new innovation, and what we see as a consequential technology that can solve those big issues that are in technology and moreover kind of society. So we'll get now into, I think, the for the marketers that might be listening in and interested in blockchain marketing, kind of some of that. So as we developed for about a year and a half in stealth mode. Part of that was a consequence of there being, in mid-2018, they call it the crypto winter. So there was a big pullback in the markets, and it just didn't make a whole lot of sense to be out in front and kind of telling the world about what you're developing during a downward cycle. When that kind of pulled back, when we got past that, we were faced with how do we go about with this technology, getting it out to the masses. And we looked at the core offering, again, something that looks like TCP/IP, kind of highly academic. And then we looked at what are the big issues that are in society right now that makes this theory actually poignant and resonate and kind of get me emotional. And one of the things was privacy, right? There was all this news cycle that seems to be recurring about privacy as it relates to social media. Also, this news cycle that seems to be recurring about data breaching and intrusion. And it might not even be a hard hack, or it could be a hard hack, but it's more like of the flavor of grabbing all this data and the things that can be constructed from it. Really is not necessarily so personally bad to me, but could be bad for society. So data is just huge and emotional, and everyone has experienced identity theft, it seems like these days. And as we're kind of putting Nest smoke alarms in our house and going to hospitals, we have interesting thoughts that come to our head about who might be looking at me, and where's this data going? We're putting sticky notes and other things on top of our cameras on our devices. So data is emotional. So we went into data, and then we decided that not any data, but the most high stakes data, which is biometric data. And how do we demonstrate this device to device academic protocol idea theory now with data? And we then went back to kind of reflecting on our personal values, our personal interests, and what excited us. Now, I mentioned I went to high school in Danvers, Massachusetts. There's no one that excited me more throughout my kind of in high school and then in college and now Unfortunately, they play for a different team, but Tom Brady and Rob Gronkowski. And for me and for a few others of our team, football and sports, and Rob Gronkowski and his personality particularly is very exciting and very, very much different than an academic data privacy problem. And if we could figure out how to bring data and white papers to a outsized personality like Rob Gronkowski, well, we think we're onto something. And so then we sat down and we reflected on the core technology. And the core technology is interdevice. And we were able to come up with a brilliant use case with data, with health data, patient health information, biometric data that comes from a wearable that Gronk has as he's working out, and passing that information on in a way that he has full control over and can see in a distributed ledger what folks are doing with it, passing it on to a server, a database that stored all the health record, the nutrition records of what he had eaten over the past 24 hours. So as he's working out, we get to track what his heart's doing, how strenuous that workout is, the food, the nutrients he might be getting more and more deficient of based on the intensity of the workout. Then we're able to compare it with his 24-hour food log, and then back it out in real time with an order with DoorDash for a meal or a vitamin cocktail that is tailored just in time to what the workout suggested he needed. And it's this sort of thing that to us became a playbook that we decided to utilize for trying to take a really theoretical concept and bring it out into light with promotion and marketing and tie into people's emotions. We partnered with DoorDash to do this, so we added use case partners as well that people could look at and say, this is a familiar thing, I get that. We also looked at what it would mean if developers out in India or the Philippines made this, and how Rob would feel about that. But Rob would feel okay if blockchain technology was used because he could consent every step of the way to what information was tracked, and also everyone else could see the secure transactions, the route of which they took, not necessarily the data. And so there could be a lot of analytics by multiple parties. You could call that regulatory, that's kind of self-regulatory in that sense, but later this sort of technology provides a framework for large-scale regulatory efforts with governments and whatever organizations, who might want to provide that. He felt like there was good self-regulatory ability here. So, wow, we just went from theory to execution, and it was, from an operations standpoint, it was a matter of aligning with what we felt resonated with us personally, and coming up with, no different than any project, a kind of framework to execute this. The biggest thing was coming up with ideas around, and intentionally focusing on that, around how to take something that's theoretical and kind of bring it to the mainstream. So it's literally, it seemed like for us, the exercise was kind of coming up with that intention, setting up a project roadmap for it, and then executing. There's another example I'll get into with as a playbook that we went to next, and that was with Cage the Elephant. Love Cage the Elephant. When I was in high school, the song No Rest for the Wicked was something I'd blare, whether it was before sports games or just in my car as a pent up high schooler with the windows down. And it would, those guys, Cage the Elephant, for anyone who follows rock, they're kind of the perennial Grammy Award winners. Every time they release an album, they kind of get the Grammy Award for the rock album of that year. So we brought this same framework to Matthew Schultz over there. And we connected with him, his emotions. He's a guy that doesn't give press interviews hardly ever, but he stands for mental health. And he's a very, he's a man that has these strong convictions about doing good in the world. So we do too, and we connected with him, not in kind of, and this might be another lesson, not that we learned, not so much in a kind of corporate pitch, but we figured out a way through our network to get in front of him and then have a conversation around what we were doing from an artistic standpoint as founders and product development guys and girls, and what he was doing in music, and what he stood for, what his values are, and what our values were. And this kind of collapsed, I think, for us, the project roadmap for this second playbook opportunity took longer to kind of get Gronk on board, much easier to get Matt on board. And we were able to even get Vanderbilt interested in this and make a connected suit that he's now worn at the Pilgrimage Festival and Firefly Festival, which tracks his biometrics and his brainwaves and looks into where he might be having indications of burnout and indications of kind of mental stress, and how there can be notifications in different protocols that he could follow that alleviate that, going into gratitude for a period of time, which is, you know, a facet that whole segment of kind of health as it relates to the things that the Dalai Lama talks about is really amazing and something relevant that I know a lot of us are interested in these days. So we provided also the toolkit for people to perform those emerging kind of studies in a rigorous way that Matt can feel comfortable, like Gronk, pointing and seeing what people actually did with the data and saying, hey, I saw that you did this with the data. Why don't you try something more that sounds like what the Dalai Lama talks about for me, because I'm interested in that flavor of science. And he could track their progress and things on the blockchain. So this is kind of another lesson for us, which is connecting personally and humanly with the folks and going back to the playbook of what we've done successfully in the past. And now, you know, we're doing that a few more times. And there's things that will be rolling out along those lines. So this is kind of the thing that if there was value that I could provide around product development and blockchain technology, it's something like, you know, this giant new emerging industry that we're seeing develop day after day. There's a part of it that's really important to cut through the noise and to be out in front and market and promote, but it's got to be done in a way that authentically ties back to the technology and gets you from theory to execution. So that's kind of my, the discussion points, kind of the case of Beyond Protocol to date. Beyond Protocol, we launched our native token ahead of the mainnet launch of our network. The mainnet, for those who are interested in blockchain technology and kind of the product development cycle, mainnet for us is later in 2022. Ahead of that, we put out a ERC20 based token, and there'll be a switch over to mainnet. So you can't necessarily use it right now to power the devices, but you can get involved in our testnet if you're interested in that, and kind of go behind the scenes and develop things. And then if you're interested from the investment standpoint, the ERC20 token is out on a few exchanges right now. As by the end of the year, it'll be on most of the major exchanges as we ramp up kind of the liquidity that is tied to the kind of the market. Will be listing on the major exchanges, and that's kind of the piece on Beyond Protocol.
Well, thank you so much, Jonathan. That was an incredibly fascinating presentation, and we have a lot of questions. People wrote in, and I want to get to them. So the first one was from Michael. He goes, when we think about blockchain, we tend to think of Bitcoin or Ethereum. We associate the technology with financial services. So how big do you think blockchain will be for IoT devices? And does the public have a learning curve to really understand its significance on this front? So I thought that was a really good question just to start off from one of our people who signed up.
Bitcoin, Bitcoin really got the whole world thinking about what the possibility is of a white paper with theory behind it, and then an application which is store of value. And man, over 10 years, it just rocked the foundation of finance and provided a lot of questions into what could be possible technically. Then you got Ethereum come up, and Ethereum basically says we're gonna make these programmatic contracts that allow you to create things like DAOs, like these self-governing organizations that can just do things automatically day after day when certain conditions are met, that you would streamline the heck out of the world in operations. And these things are just getting started, both of these kind of ideas. There's no slowing down. It's truly an exponential curve with respect to adoption and just sentiment and awareness. Now, IoT devices is kind of like, and what the problem that we're focused on is kind of like this third iteration. We're going from store of value to value transfer to now not value transfer on top of just like mainframes in contracts that are if else conditions to make an organization get animated and come to life. But we're actually talking about the whole connected world around us, and we're talking about this crazy ramp of IoT devices and also AI, which is what's going to go on top of all those devices. And IoT devices is everything from the smart pill that the doctor might prescribe to the satellite in the sky. And the interesting thing is the most kind of, I would say, aggrandized statement about IoT and the transaction volume between IoT networks in the future. And I'd say it's real, is that there will be more transactions between IoT devices than there will be between humans in our lifetime. And if you think about that, and you think about beyond protocol or technologies looking to facilitate value transfer between IoT devices, technologies looking to secure the layers that the IoT devices touch, it's kind of this new wave of technology. I think that you're seeing a stepping up in the blockchain space from Bitcoin to Ethereum, which is value transfer now to these other deep tech applications that take some more time to develop, but will be kind of the knitting the fabric of the new world.
So another question that someone wrote in was about the emerging market, and what has been your biggest learning curve for you when entering that space?
I think that if, as a product development person, as you're looking to develop for an emerging market, man, sometimes you're going to be really ahead of it, and you will see something that the market doesn't see yet, and partners that you're trying to sell into don't see it, and maybe even team members you're trying to recruit. And being able to, the challenge for us was being able to figure out creative ways to make things that we see in the future relevant. And it was a learning, it was completely something that we had no experience in, and I think anyone who's going into frontier technologies doesn't really appreciate until they get into it. How to stay relevant with your futuristic kind of idea or theory, and then every day, how do you stay alive to see the vision through, and how do you prepare yourself, in terms of culture, to embrace the fact that one of your biggest risks is not that will there be product market fit, but it's when. and how, you know, can you outlast that? And that's a lesson that we learned to kind of understand those things and try to come up with creative solutions to help solve the challenges there.
So we have a lot of questions coming in now, just like privately to me, and also some people wrote in. So I'm going to try to split that. I think we have time for about 2 more. So this one's a great one. I like it from Norman. He wrote, what is the biggest mistake you've made in terms of your, just over the course of your career as an entrepreneur, and what steps did you take to overcome it and bounce back, as you clearly have in the success of your company right now?
So I think as a founder, you have a tendency to look at the projects that you make and to get really attached, and they become like, you know, children to you. And it's hard because sometimes you'll do anything to see that the child, you know, succeeds. And so when you run an operation in an organization that has a big consequential, you know, impact for the world, you've got to also be able to step outside of your kind of ambition for the child to succeed, for the vision to come through, and be empathetic to what kind of the world also sees. And notice that you're developing for the world. You're trying to develop for that. So the challenges, I think, are just recurring challenges are how do you be an empathetic entrepreneur and creator? That's a lesson that I grapple with every day, and get outside of the vision that you see and look at where the world sees it, and make informed, smart decisions about bringing out these products that involve the consensus of multiple parties. I think this team working and kind of being a good leader, effective leader, being an empathetic leader, being a servant leader, these are the big lessons that I've learned, and they were huge challenges initially, I think, and they are for any founder entrepreneur with a vision. But it's playing the long game and kind of seeing to it that you have a really supportive team.
I think that's a great answer. And, you know, a lot of founders have also made a similar kind of analogy there. So I think it's definitely an apt one. So my last question for you, Jonathan, and I encourage everyone to also write in info@harvardandtech.com because I couldn't get to everyone's questions. You all have a lot to say as well. But we want to hear from Jonathan. Obviously, we want to hear his knowledge. What are you most excited to watch as this space matures and develops? You know, you're a pioneer in your field. What are you looking forward to?
I'm looking forward to, I see this like, I remember when the internet came out, and I kind of look at the articles I read on the internet, the books I will peer through at times, kind of talk about that concept a lot, about how, and I don't remember so much of this because I was young, but how it was just a bunch of directories and just like text on a screen, and but people were rampant about this will change the world. And then there was a market crash, and they still were rampant about it. So I think I'm so excited because I see this, I believe it, that we're kind of like the directory stage of the internet. And I think there might be market cycles similar to kind of how similar to the dot-com boom, not necessarily identical, but there'll be market cycles. And despite all that, the ups and downs, I think we're going from directory stage to real world use cases. Things like e-commerce came out of the internet, things like, you know, web, social media, Web 2.0. I think we're going to do that relatively soon with this emerging industry. And I think it'll have a massive impact on the world, and it'll change the foundation of how we do things, just like the internet did when it picked up its steam.
Actually, I have one last question. I lied. Where can we find you? And maybe different channels. I think obviously your company too. What's the best place to find you?
I would say Twitter. Twitter, and in terms of the company, but the best way for the company is Telegram, and I'm very active there. And that's more, for those who are familiar with it, a messaging service that becomes a really great conduit for communities to develop. So we have a whole big community on Telegram, and highly, and I'm accessible on Telegram, so highly, that's probably the one I'd underscore.
Well, with that, Jonathan, thank you so much for your time today. This is, again, a great webinar. Everyone had a lot of questions. We're going to get to them also offline, but got a lot of great feedback, and appreciate all of you who attended today, and we hope you'll continue to do so. You're valuable members of our community, and I hope you have a great rest of your afternoon. Take care, everyone, and stay well, stay safe.
Thank you.